the time I knew what happiness was, let the memory live again. Every street lamp seems to beat a fatalistic warning.
So I am not going to take this entire hour. I'm tall, but I'm not that tall. Can you hear me? Okay. So I took a little time earlier to tell you about our new dementia and driving resource at the Alzheimer's Association. Again, that was one little snippet of what that resource center has. I hope that you'll take a postcard and use that information for helping to start that very difficult dialogue. Talked about research, told you about Trial Match. All of this table has information about advocacy and Trial Match. Cannot thank you enough for those of you who signed up on our advocacy postcard. I thought Dr. Prederio, what a fantastic advocate he is. Wasn't he? I mean, he really is. I think we should have 20 of him in every community. He is not only an incredible doctor that I wish we all had for our family's doctor in this world of Alzheimer's and dementia, but he's also an excellent presenter, and once you learn how to understand his accent from Argentina, it gets a little bit easier. But I thought he was an incredible advocate talking about how important it is to leave here and just talk about Alzheimer's disease. The association just released in September a new report on the stigma that is still so highly associated with dementia, all kinds of dementia, not just Alzheimer's disease. And I thought it was incredible that he did incorporate that and how important it is that unless we share our stories of what we see every day and what we go through, it will continue to have the stigma. For what reason? There are a million reasons, but they're all wrong, aren't they? It shouldn't be something that should have such an incredible stigma attached to it. So, advocacy, Trial Match, a lot of resources. I do just kind of want to review some of the things in case you don't know about the Alzheimer's Association. It is a national nonprofit organization. It is the largest contributor to Alzheimer's research studies other than the federal government. Right now, I think the latest numbers from last year or the year before, Congress and our government spend $6 billion on cancer research, about $4 billion on heart disease research, about $3 billion on AIDS, and about $650 million on Alzheimer's disease. So since I've been at the association, we have been advocating for $1 billion for that many years. So that's another reason why advocacy is so important. It's not in any way to compare those other horrible diseases to the one that we're all representing today, but it does show exactly what Dr. Prederio was talking about, how, again, this disease just is not at the front of the line with awareness or money. So the association comes in behind the government at about, I think we're at $350 million that the Alzheimer's Association has raised in the about 30 plus years that it's been in existence. Our national office is up in Chicago, and we do have offices in all major areas. For all of the areas across the United States that do not have an Alzheimer's Association office, we still can be reached if you have a telephone. Our helpline is 24/7, 365 days a year. And I promise you there are people who literally will call at 3 o'clock in the morning or midnight when they're having an extremely stressful time, or it's the only time that they can slip away to get on the phone. So whatever you do, I know they're in your white bags, but please make sure that you have our 800 number because it is 24/7. It's there to ask any question. It can be confidential. You don't have to share your information, or you can. It's for professionals, it's for family members, it's for, I call without a doubt, call our national office helpline number when we get a question that we don't know the answer to, or incredibly difficult situations that come up. So 1-800-272-3900. Website. The website is full of resources. The driving website is www.alz.org/driving. There's a brand new part of the website that's alz.org/care, and it goes into the different stages and the different types of care, and it's full of education and information. You can do /research. You can do alz.org/trial match. Pretty much you could throw out a word associated with this disease and do / after alz.org, and you could find resources on the website. So it is an excellent resource available to all of you. For this area, our San Antonio and South Texas chapter website is alz.org/San Antonio. Why it was set up like that, I don't know, but it was. But it's just /San Antonio, all one word. And that's where you can see information about local resources, so that if you have a support group here in Victoria, or you have anything that you want information to go out in the community about education, etc., you can put it on the website. Let's see. Support groups. All of our support groups are led by volunteers. We have 5.5 full-time staff at the association. Our executive director in the San Antonio and South Texas office just went to go work for the Spurs. So we have an ED position that is now available, and the job posting is at alz.org. So we rely very, very heavily on volunteers, and all of our support groups are volunteers, the facilitators, and they go through pretty extensive training through the association, and so we have that available. We have started about 4 months ago a telephone support group once a month, so that for people who are in areas that can't physically come to a support group, we have people who call in from Kansas, Louisiana, Florida, Alabama. It's fun to hear the accents on the phone. And while it is different, we have to tell people, you know, if you're nodding or if you're having a reaction, you have to share it with us verbally because we can't see you. But we talk for an hour and a half, and it is a telephone support group. We're also getting ready next month to start our first early stage support group, which will be specifically only for people who have Alzheimer's and related dementias, where they can have their own support group and talk to their own peers about everything they go through with this disease. So support groups, safety services. There's at least a 60% likelihood that people with Alzheimer's will wander. We get the most horrific stories about those individuals who are still driving, who have accidents, or who drive and end up in another state in their car. So we have a whole resource of safety services. It's incredible, the helpline stories where families will tell us all about their loved one, and then they'll share that, we deadbolt lock them in the house when we go to work. I'm sure you guys have heard that as well. So we want to, safety-wise, try to have as many resources as possible available for families, so that that's not actually the option that they're using to keep their loved one from wandering out the front door. So safety services, medical alert, safe return, that is one of the very few programs at the association where there is a fee associated with getting registered into the medical alert safe return program. And that's because Medical Alert Safe Return has its own office 24/7, and they're the ones who monitor. If someone's lost, you call them. If you find someone who is lost and can't tell you their name or where they're going or where they're headed, you call that number. So there is a fee to get registered in that, but I can promise you there's never been anyone turned away from getting registered. And Safe Return Medical Alert, that program is basically where someone has identification on 24/7, they can't get it off, and it's phenomenal. Not only the bad stories, but all of the incredible stories that we hear about people who are picked up, who, they'll look and they'll have that identification on, and right then they can find out who the person is, where they live, where the call the caregiver, all those kind of things. So really, really important. Information and referral. It's very important for us to have your information and referral, all of your resources in your community, so that when we get helpline calls, we can let them know what is available. The association, we keep lists of physicians and elder law attorneys and long-term care, and we cannot endorse, or I don't even think of the right word here. Our role in that process is to let families know what's available, and also to let them know that it is okay. You actually, with this disease, oftentimes don't end up with any other choice other than to get help outside of the home, whether it's someone coming into the home or needing to move somewhere. So we are the emotional support system of, again, on helplines. How in the world do you make that really tough decision of, I need help. I need someone else to care for my loved one. That's what our role is to help them with what questions to ask. Does the staff go through Alzheimer's training? Do they go through Alzheimer's Association training? Which leads me to, we have Essentials, which is a training program that's online. It is for it's for professional caregivers, but it is also available for family members. Again, for areas that we may not be able to in person come and do training. That training, and we have brochures up here, is an excellent way there's a basics and then there's an advanced on getting certified in Alzheimer's Association trained. So we have that available. Education, I loved what Dr. Perderio said about there isn't a cure for this disease. There feels like there's oftentimes so little control in everything related to this. But one thing that people do have control of is to learn more about the disease. And again, I thought he hit it right on when he was talking about, sometimes people, when you have something else that happens medically, you know what to do. You know which doctor to go to. You know that you want to get educated. If it's cancer, you know you want to learn about it. Why are we still not to that point where, same thing, the more you learn about what is happening in the brain and why someone asked the same question 20 times and how to respond to that, the better your day will be. So we have a ton of resources on communication and how you get through the day and how you handle different behaviors that occur, all of that. Again, we just brought a little snippet of what we have, but educating yourself about this disease is really not very different than when you educate yourself about other diseases, just seeking that, how do I handle this or that? Again, that's something where the helpline can come in very handy. How do I handle this situation? Greenfield Library. So in San Antonio, we have what's called a lending library, and we loan out books and we loan out videos. But at our national office in Chicago, they have a gigantic library. It is unbelievable, and you can call and request books or a list of the best resources on this topic or that topic, or you can have books checked out and sent to you, not just books, but anything that a library provides. It's called the Greenfield Library, and again, you just call the 800 number and you can get all kinds of lists and resources and books and studies and journals and all of that kind of stuff. So, full of resources. Advocacy, we talked about how important it is to advocate, not just locally, but statewide. When Dr. Barber gets here, he will talk about basically the efforts statewide of what's happening in the state of Texas and the research consortium and the plan statewide in how to address many aspects of this disease. So look forward to hearing from that. At the federal level, we are, the 3 bullet points on the card. Now that we have a law that says there is a national Alzheimer's plan, and I do have a handout up here that talks all about the plan and what's in it, we advocate for whoever is in office, that they help us with the implementation of the plan. There is money designated in the budget for Alzheimer's disease. We're asking for $100 million more. It doesn't actually seem like very much, but in today's world, it's what we're able to ask for. So you can go to www.alz.org/advocacy. I will also say we do have, like other diseases, and disease organizations, we go to the Capitol once a year, and it's very incredible to be there with people who have the disease, who testify in front of Congress, and who share their stories about how much more we need to make Alzheimer's a national priority. That's a really big one. And so we do have that opportunity, and the association does give out scholarships to help. Obviously, going to Washington, D.C. is not a cheap trip, but we do try to, the association tries to help as many people as possible to get there. And, you know, when we've even walked into one office that said, if you're here to ask for money, turn around and leave. Oh, that's kind of disheartening, but, you know, with all the messages that we have in hand, we know that we have to continue to keep asking for them to make Alzheimer's disease more of a national priority, even if they won't necessarily put the dollars behind it that we need. Let's see, what else? We have, I don't know if any of you have participated at the Capitol there is a senior day at the Capitol every year. Right now, the chapters of the Alzheimer's Association are pulling together basically an Alzheimer's Lobby Day on March 12th of 2013 for all of us to go in purple. That is the color that represents Alzheimer's disease, and we're going to go to the Capitol next March in 2013 and share our advocacy issues and what we want them to help us with statewide. So looking forward to that. Again, I have handouts on the National Alzheimer's Plan. Couple more resources that are available. Alzheimer's Navigator, this one's fairly new. It's an online tool, and it's specifically for people who have Alzheimer's disease. For some of us, getting online and using the internet may not necessarily be what we do, but for a lot of people, that's where they go. That's where they get their information, that's where they go for chat rooms and different things. So Alz Navigator is one that is specifically confidentially set up for people with the disease to be able to go online and share with their peers. Alz Connected is a new program online on alz.org that is specifically for family caregivers to be able to do the same thing. Talk to people who are in similar situations, share their stories. You don't want to say that it's kind of similar to Facebook in that individuals can set up a profile, and then if they want to talk with other individuals, then they allow it. So it's a very confidential site, but it's a new resource for families, and then Navigator for people with the disease. So we have information on those up here as well. And I'm just talking really fast because I hope Dr. Barber's going to walk in the door any minute. Can I answer any questions?
I belong to the Brain Injury Association in Texas, and I was on the board for some years. We had the same issues as the Alzheimer's Association does. We had a state chapter, but we don't have a lot of money. And we had exactly the same complaints. We're begging for brain injury.
Absolutely.
Because I'm a survivor, and I'm just so lucky, and there's so much out there, and there's so many people that need more help.
Absolutely. And it's very prominent. And outside of this room, I'm sure that you all experience, I literally can't go anywhere where the person on my right or the person on my left isn't very personally touched by Alzheimer's disease or another thing similar to that, like other dementias. And my next question is, do you know about the Alzheimer's Association? Do you know about resources in your community? Are you aware of what help is available? No, not at all. It's, it's also a fairly young organization, although the doctor who discovered Alzheimer, who that was his last name, if you're lucky enough to discover a disease or something of the sort, they name it after you. And so it was Dr. Alois Alzheimer who discovered Alzheimer's disease, and that's why we ended up with a word that a lot of people have difficulty spelling and saying. But so we're still fairly young compared to the Cancer Society and Heart Association, etc. I think that's another reason why we have not quite reached the levels of some of those other groups.
Exactly.
See here?
No, our last speaker is about to round the corner. Yeah, he got stuck on all these side streets in this large city, and so I'm gonna take the mic real quick.
Oh,
and
please.
Thank you so much, Ginny.
Yeah, thank you, Ginny.
First things first, everyone in this room, regardless who speaks, will get 6.25 credit hours regardless. So, everybody's smiling now. Okay.
Good point.
Yeah, good point. Things that must be turned in by the end of the conference: the statement of attendance form.
Is that in their folder?
It's in their folder, their purple folder. Statement of attendance form showing you that you attended today, and then also showing which credit you will likely receive. Yes, ma'am?
Is that also for people who are not getting credits?
Those are for people who are wanting a certificate of any type. If you want a certificate, either it's a certificate of attendance just to show that you were here, or you actually want a certificate of accreditation from your respective accreditation site, you also need to turn one in. So you don't need to turn one in if you don't want a certificate, but I'm pretty sure every year wants a certificate showing that they were actually here present. The next thing that you might need to turn in is the Alzheimer's evaluation form. That is a short eval here. Go ahead and fill that out front and back and turn it into the front. Our next item is the participant profile. It is a front and back demographic profile that we need to have turned in. It brings us the ability to bring to you these conferences at a low or a free cost. So this is a huge benefit for us and you to turn these in. And the last thing, well, one of the last things is the DVD CD form. If you're wanting a video recorded DVD of today's presentation, go ahead and fill one of those out and leave it at the front, and you will receive one in the mail in a couple of weeks or so.
Oh, okay. Do you have a question?
Yes.
What form is that?
One of the forms asks for a social security number.
Yeah.
How does that work?
If you don't want to fill it out, that portion, you don't have to fill it out. If you don't want to give out your last 4 digits of your social, or you don't want to give out your birthday, you don't have to fill it out. If you want to put down your name, you don't have to fill that out. As long as I get a little bit of something, that's all that matters. Which form is that? The DVD form? Colorful form right here. So if you're wanting a video or audio version of this, go ahead and fill it out. And it's free. So yeah, any questions pertaining to continuing education? You turn them in all up front for your issue. Correct.
Why don't you take a 5-minute break? Go to the restroom if you need to before Dr. Barber.
Yes, Barber will be here shortly. He's around the block literally, so maybe they. Okay, we're going to get started with our next speaker, our next and final speaker. To proudly present to you Dr. Barber. He comes from us from the University of North Texas in around the Fort Worth area. He's a geneticist. Also to give us a great and wonderful update on TARCC. And without further ado, Dr. Barber.
Well, hi, I'm sorry to be late. I got here as quick as I could. It was a really slow piece of equipment just this side of the range. It could only manage 40 miles an hour.
Oh,
It took about 30 minutes for me to make a right turn. That was what happened. So it's great to be here. I used to come to Victoria about every 2 weeks. It's been about 15 or 20 years ago, back when I was still studying marine biology. We came through here doing the Turtle Straining Network visits. So it's nice to be back. So I always like coming to Victoria. As Joe said, I'm at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. I'm a geneticist by training. I'm in the Department of Pharmacology and Neuroscience, although actually I'm neither a pharmacologist nor a neuroscientist. I've spent my life studying complex human diseases after I switched from marine biology, of course. So I'm kind of new to the Alzheimer's field, and I'm really excited to be a part of this field of scientific endeavor. I think the brain is probably the last great frontier for medical science. Alzheimer's, if we don't do something about it, as all of you know, will cripple whatever healthcare system we have in place by probably 2025 or 2030. I think luckily we're on the cusp of making some remarkable discoveries in that field. So let me tell you a little about the Texas Alzheimer's Research and Care Consortium. I'm fortunate enough to be the scientific manager for that group. Excuse me. I guess where do I need to point this? Oh, just anywhere. Okay, great. So, just to review, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I'm sure you folks are well aware of these figures. There's over 340,000 people in the state that are diagnosed with Alzheimer's. There's about 30,000 new cases each year. Annual mortality is 5,280 per 100,000. That puts us in third place in the U.S., second place in terms of death, and third place in terms of cases. These numbers are adjusted from the National Alzheimer's Association figures for the United States, adjusted for the Texas population. The meeting that I was at this morning was talking to some folks to set up an Alzheimer's disease registry in North Texas so that we can hopefully begin to get estimates of the actual prevalence rate in the state rather than using federal figures that are adjusted for our state's population. The total economic cost is nearly $15 billion a year. The cost of businesses is about half that, $7.5 billion. There's over 1 million caregivers that provide almost 1.5 billion hours of unpaid care every year. The value of that is another $17.5 billion. That's not figured into the top figure that I gave you. So the Texas Alzheimer's Research and Care Consortium was created in response to that, the looming crisis that's actually already hitting the state, and it will become greater over the next 10 to 20 years as the baby boomers begin to age. They're just now reaching that age at which risk for Alzheimer's begins to increase, 65. And as the baby boom generation, which is 3 times larger than the generation before it or after it ages, the number of cases over the next 15 to 20 years will triple. That's any increase in prevalence per individual. The 5 members of the consortium are UNT Health Science Center Ryan in Fort Worth, UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, there's Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas Tech Health Science Center in Lubbock, and UT Health Science Center San Antonio in San Antonio. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. I'm really fortunate to have a great group of people to work with, especially Jim Hines, who's the project coordinator, and Debbie Hanna, who's the chair of the Texas Council on Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders. Joan Rice, she's our data manager at UT Southwestern. She's fantastic. The steering committee members at each of the institutions are also great. Rochelle Duty runs a first-class research and care center in Houston. As I said, it's a great group to work with. I'm not going to go into the external advisory committee, but those are probably the top 4 folks in the field internationally. So we're real fortunate. TARCC received nearly $18 million since it was created. That sounds like a lot. This last amount of $5.23 million is a bunch of money to you or me. But when you split that in half, so it's about $2.5 million a year and you divide that 5 ways for each of the centers, and you take out money for the data center and the tissue bank, it's really not much per site. In comparison, just a note, the other group that has about the same size study group as TARCC is the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative. They've got about the same number of people. They do have imaging, which we don't have as part of our consortium. Imaging is expensive, but we've had about 18 million in funding. They've had about 250 million in funding to collect roughly the same data that we collect, plus imaging. Imaging is probably 100 million of that, but not 230 million. So the state, I think, is getting excellent value for its money. The goals of the consortium are to understand Alzheimer's and to achieve delayed onset, slow progression, and ultimately to prevent the disease. And we also have a secondary aim, which is to promote collaboration across the state among everyone who's doing Alzheimer's research, which we think is critical if Texas is if we're going to garner our share of National Institute of Health research dollars. Right now, most of the money goes to either coast. There are some things that make the state unique in terms of a place to do Alzheimer's research. I feel like we're capitalizing on those. We need to work synergistically among all the people that are doing research in the state in order to outcompete some of the folks that are very well entrenched on the east and west coast. About 80% of the NIH dollars go to either coast, even though we're third in the country for a number of cases. So their objectives are to identify biomarkers that are able to diagnose the disease. Those are blood-based biomarkers primarily. Excuse me. We're also identifying genetic factors, which is why I'm involved in the consortium. I guess that's why I got the job. I don't ask that question too often. I'm just happy to have it. And we're also interested in several physiological processes that are known to influence Alzheimer's risk, including inflammation, cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular risk factors, and hyperinsulinemia. Hyperinsulinemia is a precursor to type 2 diabetes. And some researchers have called Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because of the strong link between type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's risk. The mechanism for that is not well worked out, even though the association is very well appreciated and understood. We're also focusing on people in the earliest stages of disease, and we're also looking at how disease mechanisms may be different in Caucasians and Hispanics, primarily Mexican Americans, since that is a large portion of the Texas population. And I can get into this later. I may have some slides later to talk and go into this, but there's good evidence to suggest that non-Hispanic and individuals and Hispanic individuals develop Alzheimer's by different mechanisms. So I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. We get IRB informed consent. We perform a comprehensive exam. We draw blood. We conduct this annually, so people are for annual visits. I'll get into this in a minute, so I'm just trying to put some slides. So in the first part, identify biomarkers and genetic factors. I'll give you an update on what we've done so far. We work with a company in Austin called Rules-Based Medicine. They are pretty much the leaders in the neurodegenerative field. They've done work for ADNI, for ABLE, which is an Australian group that's similar to ADNI. They've worked for a number of pharmaceutical companies that are studying neurodegenerative diseases. They've got a high throughput method that in about 3 drops of blood can measure. Up now they're up to about 280 proteins. We've stuck with the original 152 protein panel. Some of those dropped out. You notice here I say 114 serum proteins. Some of those drop out because they're below detectable limits. So there's not much you can do if the proteins are so low in the blood that they're below the level of detection. Using those data, Dr. Sid O'Brien, who just moved from Texas Tech to my institution, has developed a blood test for Alzheimer's. Several people have done that in the past, and when they tried to, it's really easy to get a panel. If you have 152 proteins, it's very easy statistically to pick a set that will split your sample into those with disease and without. You can do that for a number of conditions. And so others have done that in the past. Our blood test is the first one that's replicated in an independent sample. So we took data from ADNI, the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative that I described earlier. They make all their data available to all researchers, so it's public domain as soon as they generate it. We took our blood test, and they used plasma, we used serum. I can get into that later if you guys want to ask me about the difference. They're just 2 different fractions from the blood when you spin it down. even though we used one type of blood fraction, they used another, our blood test was able to diagnose Alzheimer's with 88% accuracy, which is about as good as you can get in a neurological specialty clinic. Much better than you get with a community-based diagnosis for someone that doesn't have training in geriatrics. So we were very happy with that. Let me describe it briefly how this works. They've got 280 different beads that are different colors. They run them through a flow cytometer, which is a machine that will pass single cells through a laser beam, one cell at a time. And they hit that, each of those pellets, in this case, is designed for cells, but you can run microspheres through as well. They hit the microsphere with two different colored lasers. One laser determines the color of the sphere. The other laser determines which antibody has been attached to the sphere. The antibody is specific for a protein. So they have 280 right now, 280 colors. We use virtually the test. It's got 152 colors. So they get 152 different proteins with 152 different antibodies. So 3 drops of blood in takes about 10 minutes. You can measure 152 proteins and concentrations in the blood. Back when I was in grad school, that would take me about 3 months to do. With ELISAs, it would take probably half a liter of blood and a lot of time. So it's an amazing revolution that's been enabled by technological advances. Those guys also did their work in Texas, so that technique was developed in Texas and UT Southwestern. So if you look, there's some red dots and some green dots, and all this is showing you is that some proteins, and there's some black dots in the middle, most of them are black. The black ones are the ones that are not informative. They don't show any different concentration in someone with Alzheimer's or someone that's in control. The red ones are overexpressed in Alzheimer's patients, the green ones are underexpressed. So there's more of the proteins in red in the Alzheimer's patients. There's fewer of the proteins that are green in Alzheimer's patients. Using these data, we're able to generate an algorithm that takes into account age, ethnicity, gender, and years of education, as well as these serum protein concentrations. And is anyone here familiar with ROC curves, this diagram that's up here? You guys know what that is? If not, I'll just kind of skip over it. Basically, if a test were to go from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, you'd have absolutely no informative value. It wouldn't tell you anything about it. It wouldn't be diagnostic at all. If it followed the left side up to the top and across the top, it would be perfect. In other words, it would diagnose every person perfectly every time. It would never give you a false positive or a false negative. If you look at the red line, that's our algorithm, it's pretty close to that. To get any closer to that upper left-hand corner, which is perfection, it's extremely difficult. So we were thrilled with this result. These are some of the proteins that were most predictive. I'm not going to dwell on that, although to say that they're involved in inflammation. So if you guys have any questions about that later, I'll be happy to go into it. There's different types of inflammation. There's acute and there's chronic. Chronic inflammation would be associated with something like Alzheimer's, but also arthritis. Chronic inflammation is like the flu, so if you got a cut that was infected. As I said, when we went to validate this in ADNI, we had to go from serum to protein. This is just some data showing that when we did some comparisons and were able to pick out the proteins that where concentrations of the protein was roughly equivalent in serum or plasma. So we restricted that 152 protein panel down to 11. So with 11 proteins, and this is the 11 right here, we were able to replicate that blood test in ADNI. You can see the curve isn't quite as close to the upper left-hand corner, but it's pretty close. It's comparable to what we got before. And it's useful enough to be it's accurate enough to be clinically useful. So we're really excited about that. As we move forward, the next steps are to get FDA approval to use that to diagnose Alzheimer's. That's going to be a huge benefit if it happens or when it happens, because right now we don't have enough specialty clinics and centers in the country to see the number of patients that are going to need to be evaluated. And so if we don't have that available, people are going to be diagnosed later in the disease course. When that happens, we know they do not respond as well to available therapeutics. We're also doing a genome-wide scan. I'm not going to go into this in any kind of depth. You would all be going to sleep. It's late today. I know. I could talk about it till 10:30 at night and be excited. You guys, I'll spare you that. We're doing, yeah, so did you get them sugared up?
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
right.
Might be so we're doing a genome-wide seed, and so we're looking at all 23 chromosomes, and so far we've identified a copy number variation. Has anyone heard of copy number variation in the human genome? So when I was in school, and when you guys were in school, you're probably told that everybody had the same number of chromosomes, and pretty much that's true. I was also taught that everyone had the same number of genes. So if I had a gene for a protein, every human had one copy of that gene. And if I had 2 copies, for example, some of the ABO blood group proteins, we've got in duplicated copies. If I had 2 copies, everybody had 2. If I had 4, everybody had 4. I was told that there was no variation in the number of copies of genes across the human genome. When we finished sequencing the human genome, it took a while because at first people thought they were seeing sequencing errors. What it turns out is there's actually quite a bit of variation in the number of copies of genes that we have. There are certain regions of the genome, certain chromosomal segments where there's a lot of variation, where some people have 1 copy of the gene, other people might have 3 or 4 copies. So that has a huge impact on a lot of different phenotypes, which are just physical examples of a chromosomal of a locus. I won't get into this too deep. So there are variable regions of chromosomes where there are differential copies of genes. So when we looked at those data, we found there's a region in the olfactory receptor which is highly correlated with Alzheimer's disease. And has anyone heard about the intranasal test for insulin as a trial for Alzheimer's? So absolutely, one of the very first things that hardly ever goes reported by individuals is a loss of smell very early in the disease course. One of the very first brain regions that's affected with atrophy is the olfactory bulbs. And so we think and the insulin trial, intranasal insulin trial, has some very early promising results. So we think it's very interesting that a copy number variant in the olfactory receptor is showing a strong association with Alzheimer's disease. This is just a picture of the chip we're using and some fancy pictures of what the data look like. The colored dots in the upper left-hand part is called a Manhattan plot because it looks like different shaped skyscrapers. I'm not going to dwell on those data. That's just how we are able to analyze the markers. And the consortium, we have measured 1 million markers, and we've imputed using data from the Human Genome Project. We've imputed another 25 million more. So we do about 26 million data points per individual. We've got about 800 people that we've done that for. Just moving the data file from one computer disk to another takes all night. So I'm learning how to write the code now, and when I mess up and it doesn't copy correctly, I'm pretty frustrated because it's all another day before I can do it. A large number of the variants are associated with serum protein levels. Remember I said we use serum proteins to make the diagnostic algorithm. We don't have enough people in the consortium to do a traditional genetic analysis. The sample sizes that are state-of-the-art now in the field are 60,000. The current meta-analysis will have 30,000 individuals with Alzheimer's and 30,000 controls. 60,000 people that will get the same sort of test we're talking about with 1 million markers that will be measured and probably another 25 million that will be statistically calculated from this first million. What we can do, however, is look at which genetic variants are associated with those serum protein concentrations that are diagnostic of the disease. It may seem like we're kind of slicing it thin, but what you're basically doing is you're going from chromosome to disease in one instance, or you're going from chromosome to protein to disease. So you sort of shorten the distance you're trying to evaluate the correlation. But when you do that, you increase statistical power. We've got plenty of statistical power to do this, and we found about 20 genetic variants, I'm not going to go into it now, that are associated with different concentrations of those proteins that are most diagnostic for Alzheimer's. So we're hopeful that when we add those genetic variants into the blood test, it will become even more accurate. And then also, the test that I said that had 60,000 individuals, about 1,000 of those are from the consortium that we contributed to that effort. And that's the way they get 60,000. There's all these different groups that are involved in that study, all over the U.S. and Europe. So Just to sum up the second part of the talk here, this is August D., who is the index case for Alzheimer's that Dr. Alzheimer evaluated. The middle picture is a copy of an atrophied brain on the right for an Alzheimer's patient, in the same section, the alternate lobe from a control individual. And there are some pictures of the plaques and the tangles that are characteristic of the disease that were observed in brain sections from August D., as well as everyone who has the disease today. Because everyone ends up looking the same, because everyone ends up with plaques and tangles and atrophies, especially in the hippocampal region, people believe that everyone was developing the disease for the same reason. Most of the work over the last 15 years is focused on gamma secretase inhibitors. Gamma secretase is the enzyme that cleaves the protein that makes the plaques, that then leads to tangle formation. When those failed, everyone's kind of reevaluated their assumptions that everyone was the same. What I want to say basically is that all the data we've collected so far in the consortium suggests that that's absolutely true, the case, that people do not develop Alzheimer's for the same reason. Some people, I hinted earlier that Caucasians and Hispanics have different disease mechanisms, so I can talk a little about that here. There's significant variation. Everything we look at when we stratify the patients on gender, on ethnicity, on inflammatory status, there's a whole range of responses that we observe. For the first example here, this is an inflammatory score. I'm not going to go into how we calculate it, but it's derived from that same serum protein data I discussed earlier. People that have a high level of inflammation, have an earlier age of onset, and doesn't have a lower score, inflammatory score, have a later age of onset. So you can see in the group of people on the left-hand part of the slide, inflammation was very important. People on the right-hand side, inflammation was not very important for the disease, for influence in age of onset. LPPLA2 is a marker for vascular inflammation, so again, another inflammatory marker. It's important for disease risk, but only in people that don't carry ApoE4, or that do carry ApoE4. People that don't carry ApoE4, that vascular inflammatory factor is not related with disease risk. Everyone know about ApoE4? Yes? No? ApoE4, apolipoprotein 4, E4 it's a lipid transporter in the bloodstream. It's the gene that has the highest genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. There's about a 4-fold increased risk for people that carry one allele, and there's about a 10-fold increased risk for people that carry 2 alleles at ApoE. However, only about half of the people with Alzheimer's have ApoE4. One of the things we know that's very different about Caucasians and Hispanics is among Hispanics, the frequency of this allele, the E4 allele, is half that in the Caucasian population. Yet disease risk is equivalent in Mexican Americans and in Caucasians. The thing that's different is diabetes is 3 times more prevalent. Type 2 diabetes is 3 times more prevalent in the Hispanic population. And the blood test that I mentioned earlier that has such a high degree of accuracy in Caucasians is not predicted at all in Hispanics. When we generate a similar blood test for Hispanics, we can do that. We get about 90% accuracy, but it's a completely different group of proteins that are driving the discriminatory function of the test. In the Caucasians, as I said earlier, it's primarily inflammatory proteins. In Hispanics, it's primarily metabolic proteins that are associated with glucose utilization and insulin signaling. And so that's some pretty good early evidence. We haven't nailed it down yet, but it's pretty good evidence that diabetes is going to be more of a factor in the Hispanic population, where there's going to be a combination of cardiovascular risk factors and inflammation in the non-Hispanic population. So every time we look at a group, we see that there are differences. Depression, some work being done by Don Royal at UT Health Science Center San Antonio suggests that about half of the dementing process may be due to depression, which can be treated. And so if we can sort out how that is related, are those independent or are they interrelated, the depression and the neurodegeneration, if those processes are parallel or if they're interrelated, it'll have different implications for treatment paradigms. But if we could identify those people who are developing dementia due to depression earlier in life, we might be able to avoid the neurodegenerative consequences by treating depression. We can do a much better job of treating depression right now than we can dementia. The relationship seems to be very different in males and females. think I have time to go into that. Maybe if you have questions, specific questions, I can try and answer those in the 5 minutes I've got. We're also looking at people in the earlier stages of disease. 3 years ago, we began enrolling people who were diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. Some people think of mild cognitive impairment as early stage Alzheimer's. It's not. It kind of is. About half of the people who have mild cognitive impairment will go on to develop Alzheimer's. About 3/4 of the other half will develop some other form of dementia, but then probably about 1/8 of them will not progress at all. So we've begun to enroll those individuals. We're also shifting our emphasis across the diagnostic categories, so that we're enrolling more people with MCI and more controls and fewer individuals with Alzheimer's, so that we can watch the disease progress from earlier stages. Because people come back in every year, we get annual data on them. So if the people that do convert to Alzheimer's disease or to mild cognitive impairment from control or from Alzheimer's from mild cognitive impairment, we'll be able to follow the disease course with blood samples which are collected every year and neurocognitive data which is collected every year. This slide is not, that's August. I've got September data, and in the September data we've got a few people that have 7 years worth of data. So you can see we've got a couple hundred people with 4 years worth of data at this point, and that's extremely valuable. There are not many groups that have that kind of data. ADNI doesn't have 4 and 5 years worth of data. They've just begun follow-up enrollment. As I said, this is total enrollees. This is not the active participants. This is total enrollees, which you can see we've enrolled 712 Hispanic individuals. We have 525 active Hispanic individuals that come back every year. And as those people are lost to the study for one reason or another, they are replaced. And so that's why we have 700 total, but only 500 active. We've got 1,600 non-Hispanic. We have 1,100 active non-Hispanic individuals. We've got a number of ongoing projects that are utilizing these data and these samples. This is a list of them here. I'm not going to go through them, but there's a way for people to request access to these data. We've got a one-page form. A lot of groups will say, yeah, we were collaborative and you can get access to our data and samples. And then there's a 3-month waiting list and a 43-page form you have to fill out. We've got a one-page form, and usually we make a decision yes or no in about 3 to 4 weeks. And my goal is to get tissue and data out within a month of that point, and we're about there right now. And we haven't really turned many folks down. We've made suggestions on how people improve their project proposals, but we work with people to enable them to get access to data because, as I said, the second aim of the consortium is to promote collaborative research across the state. And we view these resources as state property, not our property. Our plans are to begin a translational research core, which would do phase 1 trials of approved, NIH-approved, FDA-approved drugs, and to create a program of pilot grants aimed primarily at junior investigators across Texas that are studying dementia. And then finally, we're working with the state plan for AD. This was created by the Texas Council on Alzheimer's Disease. You guys know about the state plan? Anybody heard of the state plan for Alzheimer's? Well, at the end, you can copy down my email address. You can email me. I can direct you how you can get a copy of that. We're about the 7th state that have a state plan, but we're the first state that included research in the state plan. So we're working with the folks that are in charge of the state plan, it's my last slide, I think, to create a statewide symposium for everyone to get together and share ideas and try to generate collaborative research studies, and then eventually we'll have every other year a national research symposium. And finally, I have to have an acknowledgement that the consortium would not be possible without the visionary leadership of the Texas legislature and the Texas Council on Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders. I think we've developed a very valuable resource, and we're just now beginning to bear fruit on it. We've received, right now, there's about $10 million in federal research dollars that have come to Texas, either directly or indirectly, due to the consortium's efforts. And that we're just beginning. That's this year. Last year was the first year that started. We had 0 grants 2 years ago, and then we've got 10.5 million. So if you guys have any questions, I think I've used my 40 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
How do you get people to enroll in the studies, and also how do you address myths or stigma about clinical trials and research and
So the people come from different, so each site's a little bit different. The majority of our Alzheimer's cases come from Baylor and UT Southwestern. Both those institutions have ongoing, long-standing memory clinics, and they see many more patients than what they enroll into TARCC. They just take the segment of their patients that they already see that meet our, eligibility criteria and enroll them in the consortium's work. The other sites, Tech, UNT, and UT Health Science Center San Antonio, don't have memory clinics. They provide primarily controls and people with MCI, and they are brought in just through community outreach. UNT has a geriatrics program that Jazz Knievel has started, which has been going for about 15 years, a very loyal group of patients that she sees. Most of those people don't have Alzheimer's. Don Royal at UT Health Science Center San Antonio had a huge job because he was tasked not only with identifying people from the community, but he initially was only enrolling Hispanic individuals. He had a resource that was available, the San Antonio Longitudinal Study of Aging, or SALSA. It started as a cardiac health study, as many of the long-term neurodegeneration studies that are extant today, they started out as cardiovascular studies. As they follow people over time and they got older, they then began to mine those data for neurodegeneration. So he had that resource available. Texas Tech, they were enrolling Caucasians as well as Hispanics, and Dr. Sid O'Brien, who before he was at UNT was at Tech, is very good at setting up community-based participatory research studies. I have trouble every time I'm trying to say that, participatory. I still wrote that 4 times this morning, meeting this morning, so I'm carrying through that. So it depends on the site. And Miss, we have a pretty strong outreach group with the people that we have enrolled. We've got newsletters and information. It's probably not the group we need to reach most urgently, however. And so we've got a website, but I've got to admit that TARCC kind of has an identity crisis in the state. We're better known outside the state. We're better known nationally and internationally. We do our presentations at ICAD and other dementia research meetings than we are in this state. So we're working to change that. Hopefully you'll see more about this. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier you said that Texas, correct me if I'm wrong, you said Texas was third in the country as far as prevalence of Alzheimer's?
Number of cases.
Number of cases. Okay. Who was first? And then also, why is Texas showing this? Do we have a larger elderly population? What are some of the factors y'all are seeing that is making?
So it's really based on just total population of the state and population of elderly individuals. The number one in the state is California. 1 in 5 Americans lives in California, by the way. So a fifth of the country's in California. And that's, a lot of times you'll hear, political as California goes, so goes the nation. So trends that start in California, budget crisis started in California, now they're everywhere. And a big reason for that is a fifth of the country is in that one state. So in terms of overall population representation, it's kind of common sense what would happen. Was that on your, so it's basically population size. And people as they age tend to move south. And so we've got, not only have one of the largest state populations, but older folks are here in higher percentages in those states. Yes, sir.
With the statistical data and the prevalence of Alzheimer's, why aren't we getting, or why doesn't Alzheimer's get more recognition from the government, more funding?
That's starting to change. That's a good question, and I wish I could give you a great nutshell answer. I think that a lot of it has to do with the appeal that cancer can make. So cancer has received the lion's share of NIH funding for a long time. It was actually the National Cancer Institute predated the National Institutes of Health. So they've been receiving funding longer and they're more well established. I think, I hate to be indelicate but just to be frank, we don't have a poster child of the 35-year-old mother of 3 that we can put forth as saying, this is why we need to treat cancer. People with Alzheimer's are older, and frankly, older people are expected to not be as healthy. And I think that ties into it. I mean, I hate to, I don't agree with that, obviously, but I think that ties into why it's not been a national priority. I think the fact that the baby boom generation is now aging and the prevalence rate is going up and people are becoming more aware of the disease. It's only been really well known, even in the clinical community, for probably 20 years. It was thought to be exceedingly rare. And until we started doing some imaging studies and realized that, wow, a lot of people have got Alzheimer's pathology. Half the people in their 90s have got Alzheimer's. The other half, on autopsy, nearly all of those people would have enough plaques and tangles in their brain, that slide I showed earlier, to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so what it seems to be is a combination between how rapidly you build up Alzheimer's pathology in your brain and how sensitive you are to that. And we're just now beginning to sort that out. And because people develop the disease for different reasons, that's probably tied into why some people are more sensitive than others. But I wish I had a great answer for that. And I hope I don't offend anybody.
No, I mean, it's true.
I mean,
It's true.
it's,
It is.
that's, it's not right, but I think that ties into it. Any other questions? All right.
I was going to say it's exciting to see that there's some kind of breakthrough that you guys are able to start isolating that area.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I think that one of the more exciting things is the finding it for depression. It's kind of a tough thing to identify. People who are in the early stages of disease tend to be depressed, as anyone would be with a disease of that nature. People that are in the moderate to severe stages are not depressed because they really don't understand their condition. At that stage, it's much harder on the family and the loved ones than it is on the patient. And so the window at which you can study depression and how it relates to Alzheimer's is pretty narrow, and I don't think it's been fully appreciated. I don't think it's been studied enough. And so if that pans out and we are able to develop therapies that can get at that angle of the dementing process, I think we'll have some real success. And also just the recognition by the people in the consortium and the field in general that not everyone's the same. Not everyone develops Alzheimer's for the same reasons, I think will lead to some really innovative therapies. If you enroll everyone, so it gets down to a statistical analysis problem. If you enroll enough people in a trial to get a statistically valid result, and you do your power calculations ahead of time to know how many, do you need 1,000 people or 5,000 people in this trial, and you're assuming when you do that they're all the same. If there's actually only a fifth of those people are going to respond to your drug, because that's the fifth that are developing the disease by the mechanism that drug is treating, then you really need 5 times as many. Or you need to have a way to identify those people that are going to be responders up front. And I think the data that we're generating in the consortium and in other similar groups across the country will enable us to begin to, number one, pick people that are more likely to develop dementia, and so we can study earlier stages of disease, and also identify what the mechanism is that's problematic in a group of individuals, so you can say, yeah, these are the people that have this score on this test, the ones we want to enroll in this trial. And I think they'll also allow repurposing of FDA-approved drugs, because as we identify disease mechanisms that were underappreciated previously and can target those early, we can hopefully prevent the downstream pathology that occurs later in life.
Thank you, Dr. Barber. I think his last statement reminds me of Rita and I had the opportunity to be on the morning show this week to talk about the Alzheimer Symposium, and one of the first questions by the interviewer was, what makes Alzheimer's so much harder to deal with than any other health issue? And I answered, in my opinion, other health issues, cardiac issues, cancer issues, they're tangible. I mean, they're diagnosed and they're treatable, and you can have a surgery, and there's possible, you can get better. With Alzheimer's, there is no cure. You just progressively see your loved ones deteriorate, and it's not necessarily, it affects your families. It kind of takes everybody with it. So when we had this opportunity to give you these credit hours and initially went to say support us in our first venture of a symposium and come to our event, we are very happy to see that so many people did. You as the caregivers, may not have all the answers and treatments and cures, but you have a hand in taking care of the Alzheimer's patient the best way that you absolutely know how and can. So again, we want to individually thank our speakers today. Robert Miller with TARCC Geriatric Mental Health Center, Meredith Patterson with All's Care Assisted Living, Dr. Denise Miner-Williams with UT Health Science Center in San Antonio, Allison Ray with Brookdale Senior Living, Dr. Nestor Perderio with Psychiatric Consulting Services, Dr. Robert Barber with the University of North Texas Health Science Center, and of course Ginny Funk with the Alzheimer's Association. And thank you to our San Antonio partners, the Alzheimer's Association, as well as the UT Health Science Center. We hope that you learned a lot today, and we thank you so much for coming.
Please do not forget to turn in your forms at the detention table.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I definitely meant to recognize my coworker from San Antonio, Maxine, who really was the staff liaison from the association. So thank you for all of your hard work, Maxine. And Joe and Mark, same thing. Thanks for all that you do. Appreciate it. Please take brochures.
No, record the picture.
Oh, I am? Yeah, you're.
If anyone wants brochures, we've got a lot.
Midnight, not a sound from the pavement. Has the moon lost her memory? She is smiling alone in the lamplight. The withered leaves collect at my feet, and the wind begins to